So to start this off, I absolutely love The Longest Journey. In my more recent constant digging through video games past in an attempt to escape the drudgery that is modern AAA gaming, I have found several games worth ignoring nearly all of modern gaming for. For some reason, quite a few of these is point-and-click adventure games, which have resulted in a far more positive outlook than I've expected. But then again, do you really retool old games to work with new hardware and operating systems if it isn't going to sell? So that's a moot point, but even the good games are better than expected. The Longest Journey is arguably one of the best of these games I've found, and that's due to how out there some of the stuff in this game can be. I'm going to bring this up a little later, but for now know that these games have a lot of interesting things in them, and not in the purposely weird kind of things, but in the world-building things that happen to be fairly unique. So, from what I've read, The Longest Journey was a well-received game, and of course it was going to get a sequel, and I think you can guess, without even looking at the length of this video, that I didn't really appreciate the sequel. Now, this stems from a lot of things, but most of it could be easily forgiven if it didn't mess up the narrative with inept writing choices and poking at the continuity of the red-hot fireplace poker. They try to downplay the absolute ruination of the continuity by claiming it's not a direct sequel, but if this isn't a direct sequel, I don't know what that term means. It stars the same person, albeit she shares a spotlight with two other people. It shares the exact same locations throughout Arcadia and even revisits some places back on Stark. Quite a few characters make reappearances, and not just to be nostalgia bait, but have at least a minor mingling effect on the sequel's plot. So at any time if the developer or anyone else claims that any of my points are not applicable to the sequel, I'm just going to say that it's not my fault you didn't do enough to actually separate the two games. So before we walk through this game hitting each and every failed plot point and named character moment, I might as well talk about the more general problems I have with the series. The worst part of The Longest Journey was April herself. As a vessel for the player to experience this world, she's just fine, but as a character in this world, she's good until you reach about the halfway point, and then she starts to bother me. April is just an average 18-year-old girl, and throughout the game she really doesn't develop any abilities outside of making a portal between the two worlds, so nearly everything she does in the game is her using her intelligence to outwit people. Saving the dragon's egg, killing the weird banshee, trapping the all-powerful wizard, meeting all four of the dragons who literally forged the world into two separate dimensions, and overthrowing an entire fascist regime that attempts to control all of the known universe is just a small part of a long list of accomplishments April goes through as you play this game. At first, her talking about how she isn't worthy or capable is extremely reasonable because she is just an average girl who's an artist. Now don't take this the wrong way, because I'm also an artist, and you have to understand, we really don't have a set of skills that gives us any particular usefulness in a certain situation, like a doctor or an engineer would have. Hence the not having abilities spoken earlier. This continues for a little too long, as just after the halfway point we have to hear the same dialogue about her being an average girl and not being good enough to save the world, after she's already accomplished quite a lot and will continue to do so right after this moment. Now in a worse game this wouldn't even be a big deal, but such a simple writing mistake in something that does a great job telling a story is hard to ignore. The more perfect something is, the more perfect it has to be, and even though I love The Longest Journey, this is a match lit in a dark cave. So a mild review for the first game aside, how does this relate to the sequel? Not in a positive manner. This character arc is repeated for all the main characters in the next game with some degree of variability, but they're all safe within the realm of, really? April starts off defiant in both games, gets a little unsure of herself in the middle, and becomes defiant towards the end. Zoe's arc is virtually the same, with the only difference being she starts in the unsure part of the arc, and stays there for 80% of the game. And then the guy who only has 3 lines in the whole game, so forgive me when I don't look up his name because it doesn't matter, his arc follows the DUD that the other two characters follow, except for his was over a span of a half hour. Now I'm going to discuss the problems with the same character arc when they present themselves, since they are interwoven into the plot more than the first game, but we won't be bringing up the dude's arc because there's no reason to. Another thing that might not be a problem is the severe toning down of the puzzles. This may not bother you because the focus of these games is the narrative, but it's pretty noticeable either way. Now this might even be a good thing because the puzzles were crazy in the first game, but they were crazy in a very interesting way. Now I did have to use a walkthrough in the middle of the game in order to get past a few parts, but it really could have been because of my dumb, monkey, modern AAA brain, or they are actually convoluted to the point where they're poorly designed, but I have no bearing to evaluate that point. All I know is that I wasn't stuck for long periods of time in Dreamfall, so I'm gonna have to say that's not all that bad. Something that really bothers me, and that carries on to the next game, is technology seeping its way into Arcadia. Now there are some in the original game, but it is extremely limited, and the only thing I can think of is whatever April brings with her the many times she opens the rifts, and the only other thing I can think of is Westhouse's motorcycle. No, I'm not 100% certain, but if I remember correctly, he built it himself, which is why it had such bad exhaust, but other than that, everything was of a certain time period. In the 2 other games, there is so much more, and it's really bothersome. Magic capable of controlling and manipulating the entire universe is separating the 2 Earths. So I can see something like a single motorcycle being transferred over, but in just 10 years we have zeppelins and factories, and whatever those stupid windpipes that you used to use to send messages around the office before the internet are not only invented, but widespread. Now this really doesn't bother me that deeply because the game is bad enough without it, but it really ignores a lot of the setting just for something. I don't know why it's there, because you can have a conquering nation with just swords and spears, so maybe it's an aesthetics thing? The last thing we need to talk about is the combat. Now, I have read in several places that corporate oversight hit this game pretty hard, and it does seem that the combat was directly created because of that. I know I can overlook a lot of things, but really the combat isn't all that bad. It could be improved a bit, but it's similar to a lot of great games, and is more about timing and strategy rather than excessive gameplay that you'd expect from a game like Devil May Cry. Now, both work perfectly well, but you have to design around them, and this game didn't do that well enough. But still, it's not that bad considering. So right off the bat, we start off with Zoe going through her morning routine while whining and crying about her first world problems that she has to deal with every single day. This immediately put me off, but eventually I let go of that problem, and she does turn out to be proactive and kicks a lot of crap out of people, so a total win in my book. I know it's childish, but first impressions do affect us a lot, and this gives off a very weak one. But it does end with Zoe being the best and most entertaining character out of the three, so victory overall, I guess. Skipping ahead of it, we have something that is extremely subjective, but I hate it nonetheless. So in the first game, there's this part where I just stopped playing the game. I just had it minimized for a week and I couldn't even look at it without getting upset. This was because this massive asshole who pestered us all the time basically forces us to agree to go on a date with him. And that was because he knew where some old school theaters were, and he wasn't going to tell us without sex being traded for it. Outside of him being a dick, this upset me because right next to him was a terminal to the internet, and that seemed like a better place to go rather than agreeing to anything that worthless pile of shit wants, so I just didn't. I then looked ahead in a walkthrough, and it turned out that you didn't even have to go on the date, and that's when I decided to start it back up, and I'm glad I did, because not only did I get to ditch that asshole, he also got shot, which was worth it. But he didn't die, and even though that ruined the perfection of that moment, I didn't think worse of it. That is until he shows up in Dreamfall. Now, a positive is that we get to berate and assault him some more, so that's always good, but otherwise he's just a generic villain. This also fits in with other parts of the game, but really for him it means that he's just there and he kind of does stuff a few times in the game, and there's no resolution for him. He doesn't die, he doesn't get hurt, he just disappears, and since he doesn't show up in the third game, I'm going to assume that he is just done. Which is okay since I hate his guts, but really, adding a character that does very little in the narrative is significantly worse than having him have a very defined ending with him dying because of his just desserts in the first game. So before I played the second game, I dug around because I remembered Zoe's name being plastered everywhere for the promotional material for the third game, and with barely going into it, I just knew April was the main character, and that depressed me a bit. Then after the TV ad told Zoe to save April Ryan, I got kind of excited because at the very least she was important to the story. And then we started playing with her, and she is murdering some dudes, and I'm so excited that I don't even question how someone with a staff is killing fully armored Romans, but fuck it, April's amazing. And then we get the first interaction between April and Zoe, and it's the saddest thing I've ever seen. So for the rest of the game, April will not shut up about how it isn't her fight and blah 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 BS blah blah. What's worse than the stupid mentality that's being presented is how lazy it is. It could easily be worked into something that's reasonable, but they don't. So April is like, I've already been a hero, and I'm not doing that anymore, and I don't live in Stark anymore, and etc. This ignores the biggest point, which is, you are the mother of time. Like, a lot of the first game was about her not only coming to terms with this position she now holds, but also learning what it even is, albeit she is still in the dark about what that actually means for her. Ignoring the lazy reasoning for her losing her powers, and then the even lazier reasoning for her getting them back, you're in this for the long haul, and I'm pretty sure she knows this already. But rather than have this be about something more tangible, like she's doing what she can, where she can, and just being stubborn about helping Zoe because she sees a need in front of her, and has forgotten the larger conflicts that affects everything, it's her whining about not having powers and whining about having to save the world again. Yeah, I love it when great characters and great games get ruined by inept writing. Now this is in all likelihood the best and easily the most interesting part of this game. So we defeated the Mad Wizard in the first game by tricking him to get sucked into a calculator, and he has made his way out of that and has rehabilitated himself and is now a potion salesman who wrote a book that accidentally blew up in the faces of thousands of people. Now in the longest journey, trapping him in the calculator was some mild stuff, but in this game, we are desperate for anything interesting as most of the game rehashes things from the first. But even that wasn't enough, as he is now a super nice guy and is instrumental in helping the heroes out and allowing them to save the day. This was a breath of amazingly fresh air, and I appreciated it so much. Strap in, folks, this is going to be a long one. Crow's the best character in all of the games because he is such a dick. While everyone in the story has their scripts and they are desperately trying to give the best performances they possibly can, Crow throws the script on the ground and just wings it. Pun kind of intended. And he's not even the kind of dick you'd expect him to be, as he was kind of snubbed by April, although she was in a position that it couldn't be helped. He escapes and then decides to tag along with the one person that would ever be nice to him and is genuinely helpful to her. Then that asshole starts throwing salt everywhere and being as passive-aggressive as he possibly can be, all because he can. He is quite enjoyable, which is sad because I completely forgot about him while playing this game. A while into this game, I said to myself, where the hell is Crow? And then he finally shows up with one of the laziest reasons for a character that can fly not being around his best friend and companion, even as they age 1,000 years. And they just decided to not look for each other. If it was a short time, yeah, sure, what they are doing is important, but 8 years is way too long for this to be acceptable. Now, this is speculation, but I get the feeling this was because of the production. Because of the way this is framed, and the extremely contrived explanation presented, I'm going to wager that they forgot about Crow. Now, it could be that the developers wanted to mimic the timing of the first game with Crow showing up a decent chunk into the game, but why would you even do that? And if for some reason you really wanted to do that, why do it in the most purposely bad way you can think of? Really, this does taste of, oh shit, we forgot about Crow, you know, that extremely important character. We can't put him in earlier because that would mess with the flow of the game, so we'll have to do it here. If any of you have a better reason, then please tell me, but every direction this goes just boggles my mind. Then we get the fact that a dragon's design was modified so that it would show off some tits. We're going to ignore the idea of sexualizing a dragon by making her human and focus on why they did it. So, they needed to kill all the dragons because of a plot point they may or may not set up in the next game, and rather than saying to themselves dragons are not immortal and not indestructible, they thought, how do they make it more killable? And so we have two reasonable explanations as to why they changed her into a human. One, tits. And two, modeling a dragon would be a lot harder, and we have to give some explanation on how this asshole could ever kill her, even though it's heavily implied that he had already killed the dragon under the water. So yeah, pretty dumb all around. But then she says some extremely stupid stuff, and we as the audience are supposed to buy it without even running it through our brains even once. So going back to an older point, why did she lose her ability to open a portal? Couldn't she just not want to go back? Now we have to have this convoluted notion that she just can't shift anymore, which is made only worse by the notion that she just forgot how to do it. How do you forget something like that? And then the white dragon woman just waves her arms, and what do you know, she can shift again. It's not like arbitrary rules for your continuity devalues it and makes you seem like a hack writer. And if that doesn't bother you, if none of this gets to you at all, we get something that will. So after whatever happened with Crow, and after the titification of a dragon, and after the retard rationality of, oops, I just forgot how to magic, we then have April just creating a portal to the Guardian's realm. Oh no, that's perfectly reasonable. I shouldn't have to explain this. If you played the first game, then it should go without saying how absolutely bad this is. And then they justify it in the game with the notion, shit changes, which is fucking retarded. Under what circumstance is that good enough to not be completely ashamed of your lack of artistic integrity? Everything that happened in the first game, all the people dying, the two dragons killing each other, infiltrating a prison in space, and murdering and capturing several evil things was all just to open a portal so we can get to the Guardian's realm. Let me repeat that for you. Literally, the entire game was just so we can get to the Guardian. And if you have played that game, then you know that it was extremely difficult, as The Longest Journey is a pretty apt title. But no, just because Crow was there, we are now able to go straight to the Guardian without any trouble. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, this was the second time I stopped playing a game for a week based on sheer agitation. Unlike this time, the Longest Journey version doesn't bother me anymore now that I have full context. This doesn't change no matter what the context is, because it's still Zoe getting over the fact that Reza is dead very quickly. Now I think a lot of my anger towards this scene is due to previous scenes, but enough of this is still pretty stupid. So only after 20 hours or so, these two people have really developed a deep relationship worthy of adding it to a video game's narrative. I don't know if the game ran out of time and this moment was shallow because of that, or if it was just another shoddy writing job, but either way, it's not too great. So we then get to the top of this depressing mountain, and it's probably the saddest part of this game. So after the no effort it took to get into the Guardian's realm, we then have to have this conversation in which we learn that he's the controller of dreams, and yet he knows nothing of dreams. So we are going to ignore the fact that this convolutes the continuity a lot, and just focus on what this scene does in this game. This gives April the justification to keep being a wet blanket for the rest of the game. I'm not kidding. From this point on, she basically does nothing but whatever she wants, and it doesn't even revolve around the plot at all until the very end, and that happens to her and not with her. She really has no agency other than to decide to help Zoe out, and rather than have her snap out of her mental state of not being a character, the Guardian says, yes, you are correct. Do absolutely nothing productive and continue being a dick because even though you're the mother of time, you have absolutely nothing to do with this extremely important thing going on that will probably kill us all if it isn't stopped. And what makes this worse or better, depending on the perspective, is that this is blatantly a lie. Now, there is no way I can guess what were the changes made because of the budget and time constraints of this game and the 10-year hiatus to the third game, but it's obvious that there were changes. I'm going to go ahead and assume that the April stick was something introduced in order to save time because she does play a larger role in the story in the next game, and I'm thinking they are not so retarded to think that including a character who is unwilling to participate in the narrative that also isn't a joke is a good idea. I'd rather blame this on the EA effect, but even with that in mind, this could have been so much better. So this is my favorite part of the game, and it's not in a good way. So this is the scene where the dude and April have a discussion and it convinces the dude to betray his clansmen. So if you take this to a hyperbolic place, it's basically, hi, you're evil and you're ruining our way of life. Oh, I best announce everything I know and love. If you bring the third game into this, which presents a lot of the backstory for Kian, this turns into a head-scratcher as he is confused and unaware that murdering and butchering entire groups of people isn't a good thing to do. Now that doesn't bother me as it was done well in that game and the EA effect is all over this scene. What does bother me is the fact that this is the most important moment in the narrative arcs for both April and Kian, and it comes off as a throwaway moment that they let the intern write. This needed to be a moment in which the writers justified April's wet blanketness, and really it was just reiterating what we already knew. And this was meant to be a pivoting point for Kian switching sides, and again, it's laughably done. Nothing leading up to this point might make him even question his faith or his loyalty. It's just a brick wall and bam, he's a good guy now. This could have been natural and well-paced over the entire game, as it should have been, but that's not what we got. And here we go again. So the wet blanket is at its wettest after being told that she was a wet blanket by Dr. Manhattan, and this causes Crow to dump her and help Zoe out in the whole saving the world thing. And of course, April went from a person who was willing to sacrifice herself in order to save the world to an absolute selfish asshole. Which, if you have been paying attention, she spent the last 8 years leading freedom fighters against an empire's invasion. But no, since she can't get paid by the universe as she awkwardly states, Crow leaves her behind and dipsets. Is it strange that the most reasonable character is a self-entitled and smug asshole of a bird? Because he is in fact the most reasonable character in this game. What's worse is, what is she going to do while Zoe's out saving the day? Absolutely nothing. Yeah, that's right. She spent this entire game talking about how she is no longer a part of the story because she was going to die. So if you've played both games, you're probably thinking the exact same thing I was. Remember when I was stabbed in the stomach and thrown to the gators? So yeah, in the first game, April goes through a door, and it leads to an older woman who gives her all this cryptic information, and it turned out to be super old April. But apparently that didn't happen because this game is not a sequel, and April got her ass stabbed to death. But that's nothing because someone can probably bring up the fact that this game is not a sequel, which I'll say, bah, but whatever, you win. But that's not even the problem here, I just thought it was really funny. So this is the end of Kian's and April's story arc in this game, and it's just a mess. So the only reason Zoe was there was to have her view it for whatever reason. Kian was there, and the reason was pretty stupid as well because it was just so they can place a trap for the Apostles and track him to the Rebels' camp, which they really didn't have a reason to know that that's where he would go, which is weird because they could have easily tracked the suspicious boat that left in a hurry, and that could have given them the reason to attack when they did, and this, along with the meeting Kian had before with April, could have easily caused him to lose his faith and loyalty to the Azadi. And April is just like, screw you and the balance, and then she goes and gets stabbed to death, making all of her narrative extremely pointless outside of the point where she helps Zoe. And she doesn't even fight back, and she just takes it like a champ, and that somehow is the most confusing part of all of this. And then we get this ending that just comes out of the blue. So it turns out Zoe's mother was behind it all, and she implanted the notion that Zoe should save April in Sadako's mind. This one also confuses me. So first off, how did anyone know April was alive because no one has seen her in 10 years, and anyone that has seen her wouldn't know her by that name? And if you have played the game, you know everything that happened in this game, right? Meaning, Zoe's mother predicted and/or staged her own attack in the hopes that Zoe would save her. Then Zoe would go on an international adventure in order to help a person that she's been kind of at odds with, wait for Zoe to develop her super secret dream teleporting powers, allow all of the secrets of the largest corporation in the world, also the place that the mother's works and probably owns a bit of it, to be found out. and then have Zoe find the secret lab in which they tortured a little girl to death. And rather than capturing Zoe at either of those places where she can be monitored, and even if she does wake up, she's only one bolt away from a permanent dirt nap, she then goes to Zoe's house and confronts her there, somehow gets her to trust her, and then puts her in a permanent coma. I know for a fact this wasn't the ending the developers wanted to implement, but damn does this bring up a lot more questions than it answers. So yeah, that's Dreamfall: The Longest Journey. Not a sequel even though it shares its name and everything else, and the perfect warning of the EA effect just in case any future developers thinks getting in bed with a publisher will end in their benefit. A lot shorter of a review than we normally have, but I will attribute that to most of the game not being all that bad. But what is bad is incredibly frustrating. I know the sequel to a great game is probably never going to be as good, but it's just weird that so many profound and amazing games like The Longest Journey and 999 somehow have such terrible sequels despite the same people working on them. With most newer games, it's a bunch of the exact same thing we saw 100 times before. Another COD, another Madden, another Assassin's Creed. So I'm far less inclined to get upset about that when they don't meet the incredibly low standards that I've set for them. But when these great games fail, it hurts, and it creates these 20-minute long videos when I cry and whine about the quality that no one even noticed whether it's there or not. So on that note, on to another whining fit. See ya next time.